76 is a really unique product in that it's still pushing. There are still updates coming, kind of, sort of. I don't know if you call something that breaks the game over and over and over again an update, but the game is changing. And with things like Wastelanders coming relatively soon, barring more delays, it's hard not to think about and kind of conjure in your head what a real Fallout 76 would be. Something that was actually worth your time. Something that Bethesda put the time, energy, and passion into that they put in, say, something like a Fallout 3 or a New Vegas, which I know was made by Obsidian. The point is that unlike something like Anthem, there is a lot of room to wonder what could have been. Yes, Anthem could have been a much better game. Yes, it could have played better. Yes, it could have had better structure. But at the end of the day, Anthem wasn't a known quantity, right? That was the first exposure to the game. Fallout 76, well, we know what Fallout is. We know what Fallout can be, and we know what Fallout with friends, at least in our heads, could be. But the most recent Fallout news kind of threw me through a loop because it was almost a weird, shady, low-key admission that Bethesda kind of didn't know what was going to work and what didn't work, or what people wanted. And not only did they not know what people wanted, they were just kind of throwing things against a wall and hoping that something stuck. But I think even worse than that is that Bethesda clearly has no idea what they're doing in this space. And what's remarkable is that now seems like they're kind of admitting that. But I think the best place to start is kind of where this context is. Nuclear Winter was a weird idea, right? It was, let's take the hype of something that's working elsewhere in Fortnite or Apex Legends or PUBG and translate it into Fallout, which was never, ever going to work in a way that made anybody happy. And then you take something like Fallout 76 that already has a sort of pseudo PvP element and throw in this battle royale that no one wants, and you get a battle royale that unsurprisingly no one really wants, which is fine, I guess, for the people that play it. But there is that PvP element to Fallout, and I don't know if you've played Fallout 76, but PvP in Fallout 76 kind of works like this. You walk up to somebody, you attempt to engage them by shooting somewhere in the direction of their body and hopefully magically hit them, and then they do the same to you, and you quickly devolve into this circle of jumping and shooting and missing and jumping and shooting and missing. Sometimes it's even better. Sometimes it's jumping and wildly swinging some sort of melee weapon over and over and over again, and then someone eventually expires and you've kind of won this really horrible game of blind boxing that no one wanted to engage in the first place, and your reward for that is not much of anything. I mean, there's, I guess, kind of an incentive to engage in PvP in the actual rewards themselves, but at the end of the day, it's never really worth it. And I mean, think about it. What do you do when you engage in a normal game of Fallout, right? You walk up behind or near an enemy, and the first thing you do is enter VATS. And you enter VATS because it's a substantially more enjoyable and easier way to engage in combat. It turns it almost into a turn-based game than the live combat that you would engage in otherwise. And this has been the case for essentially every Fallout game since Fallout 3. But we recently got this quote. Actually, it's multiple quotes from Pete Hines. He recently said that they misunderstood their audience. Quote, "Well, I mean, at the end of the day, our intention was always we're going to put this out there," this being PvP, "see what our folks think, and then cater the stuff that we do later to their reaction." So, for example, I think we were a little surprised by how few people wanted to take part in PvP and how many more were interested in PvE together. As opposed to, I want to test my mettle against you and let's go into a duel. There's some folks who do, don't get me wrong, but I think it's a smaller percentage of our player base than we thought. Now let's break down this first quote, because there's a lot more to it than just, we didn't think PvP was gonna work. He starts with, "At the end of the day, our intention always was we're going to put this out there, see what folks think, and then cater the stuff we do later to their reaction." Now, you could read this as we're going to release a game, and then the content we release after, the roadmap, the updates, will cater to what those players engage in or enjoy the most. But I think what this really says, based on the actual launch date of Fallout 76, is more of an admission that, hey, we at Bethesda released this game having no idea whether or not people were going to like it. We had no idea whether any of these features were worth anybody's time. We essentially were flying blind, and we were just hoping that maybe something would stick and we could take your money later based on whatever that one thing is. Which is clear they also did with Nuclear Winter, which is just one of the worst battle royale modes you will ever engage in. He goes on to say, "I think we were a little surprised by how few people wanted to take part in PvP and how many more were interested in PvE together. together. Players don't want to test their mettle against one another into a duel. Now, I think this is just one of the most remarkable quotes from a Bethesda employee of any kind this year. I find it totally unfathomable, unbelievable, mind-rackingly confusing that Pete Hines, who does indeed know the games that he's producing, he knows what he's releasing, would say something like, "We were surprised by how few people wanted to engage in PvP." How is that possible? How could someone at Bethesda possibly think that the main draw for a cooperative Fallout game was going to be PvP? So let's talk about why people don't want to engage in PvP and why this is very telling for how Bethesda thinks about their games, how they think internally about the things they're releasing. The answer is super obvious as to why people aren't engaging in PvP as much as Bethesda thought. That's because the combat in almost every Bethesda game that comes out of Bethesda Studios, Fallout, Skyrim even at times, is horrendous. It is absolutely atrocious. Skyrim fares a bit better, right? Skyrim is more melee based and a lot of the magic spells are area of effect or don't require a lot of precision. There are some that do, but most of them are things you wouldn't need VATS for. But in every game, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76 being no exception, the moment-to-moment real-time combat is absolutely atrocious. It is archaic, it is clunky, it is imprecise. There is nothing good about it. Weapons don't feel weighty, they don't feel good to carry, they don't feel good to use, and worse yet, once you start firing weapons, what you have is the most unreliable system of mechanics you could possibly engage with in this decade of gaming. I cannot think of a single game with worse FPS mechanics that I have played in recent memory, and that's why VATS was created. Bethesda, I thought, understood the insufficiencies with their combat design and created VATS to kind of counteract that, while also being a callback to the more strategy-driven gameplay of the isometric Fallout games. But they carried VATS with them. VATS stopped time, it allowed you to slow things down, it allowed you to pick your shots, and it also created a percentage system that made it clear what you were or what you were not going to hit and how likely you were to do so. It made the game and its combat bearable. It allowed you to get through it. It became a crutch for basically every player, but more importantly, it became a crutch for Bethesda. They never really overhauled the system. Now the combat is a bit better on Fallout 4, but not by enough, and it's certainly not improved enough in Fallout 76 to make any marginal difference either. As a gamer, as someone that picks up 10, 20, 30, 40, however many games a year, you begin to develop an understanding of what feels right for each genre. When you pick up a game like Doom, which is also made by Bethesda, but as a publisher, you begin to quickly understand that this is what a game in first person with ranged weapons should feel like. This is the brutality I'm looking for. Whatever you understand, the movement speed, this feels great, and you can understand that across the board. It's part of the reason, even with all the movement changes, that Call of Duty's FPS gameplay hasn't changed all that much year to year. When it works, it works. Fallout does not have a working, functional FPS or even third-person suite of shooting mechanics. And so, of course, real-life people are not going to want to face off against one another utilizing what they have in front of them. It's absolutely ridiculous to expect players to take a bunch of systems that feel horrible to use, a bunch of mechanics that don't mesh together well at all, terrible movement mechanics, and say, have at it with one another. It's easy when it's an AI, right? You can predict their movements, you can understand them, and more often than not, they're created to be killed, right? Their movement patterns are not designed to be unpredictable for the most part. Some are and some aren't, but the point is that a human being is the most unpredictable being imaginable, right? It's not an AI. You cannot predict what they're going to do. And so when you have two people jumping around, aiming wildly or swinging axes or whatever they're doing, it's not fun. There's no feedback. There's nothing that makes you say, wow, I want to do that again. There is no incentive at all to engage. And what this tells me, this quote in particular, that they didn't know that people weren't going to want to engage in PvP, what it tells me is that even Bethesda doesn't seem to understand just how bad these systems and mechanics are, just how bad the real-time combat in their RPGs is. They really don't get it. If they got it, they would never say something like, we had no idea that people were going to be more in favor of PvE than PvP. I saw no one super excited to get into duels, as Pete Hines puts it, before Fallout 76 came out. Not a single person. Every single person I saw or talked to said the same exact thing. If the shooting mechanics are what they've always been and VATS is not there, that's going to be miserable. And that's exactly what it ended up being, unsurprisingly. But Pete Hines continues. He says, we have a plan for the future. We're going down this path. It's not that we're doing this Wastelanders thing and we're done. The team has done a lot of work on systems to make things possible in Wastelanders that they want to build on and use for more content that we're going to be doing the rest of this year and into next year and beyond. We have a roadmap that we'll be sharing before too long, probably after Wastelanders. Let's get through Wastelanders and then talk about that. He says that will cover all the way through the end of next year. We've already been talking about internally what is our plan for content into next year. When we feel confident enough to share that with everybody, I'm not certain, but we like what we've thrown out pretty far. Now, I actually like this part of the interview. In it, Pete is basically saying, hey, we're not giving up on Fallout after Wastelanders. We're not just going to move on from Fallout 76. We're going to keep applying concept. We're going to keep building. Now, what that actually means, I don't know. That's a whole lot of marketing speak. They've yet to deliver anything that meaningfully fixes or makes Fallout 76 worth $60 or even $30 for that matter. They've continued to treat the people that actually play the game, the people that actually love what they're playing, that want to see this fixed poorly, but they're not giving up on it. But I think the crux for me, if we can get to the more commentary-driven side of all this, is that this interview proved to me something that I don't think I myself even realized before reading this, which is something I mentioned earlier. Fallout 76 is really a series of ideas and a series of modes that Bethesda simply didn't have games or places to put, and so they shoved them all into one thing, didn't complete any of them, and hoped and prayed that people would like a part of it, one of these modular little sections, just enough for them to actually invest the time and money into pursuing and building out so that they could have something that could make them money long term. I always knew that this game was rushed, right? Everybody does. I always knew this game was bad. I always knew that Bethesda was mishandling its development. I always knew that Bethesda was mishandling the way it was updated, the way they treated their fans. But what I didn't know is that this kind of seemed to be the plan from day one. They had this thing that they didn't understand and they just wanted to see if they could get it in hands and if people would pay for it. And if they did, great. And if they didn't, oh well. I know this is not the end of Fallout 76's story, but what I do know is that I'm infinitely less excited for the future of Fallout and Bethesda's development future from this interview by itself, in isolation. This one interview, even if these things are being read into, even if the lines are being read in between, this did not sit well with me, especially the way that Pete Hines worded things. It just makes me feel like Bethesda is kind of directionless at this point, and the direction they're trying to head is the direction of the money instead of the quality, and they still don't know how to adapt both of those things to fit together, and that is worrisome. But anyways, now as always, I want to know what you guys think. What do you think of these things that Pete Hines has said? More importantly, are you going to hop into Fallout 76 once Wastelanders, all the NPCs, that narrative is in there, it's completed, it's done being updated? Is that something that interests you? Could you get back into Fallout 76 for any reason at this point? Or would you be hopping in for the first time and does it still interest you at all? Let me know the answers and those questions down in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation. As always, if you enjoyed this video, press that like button. If you haven't yet done so, also press subscribe and hit that little bell next to the subscribe button. That way you're actually notified when I upload, because YouTube has a bad habit of not doing that. So hit subscribe in that little bell, and I'll throw a couple videos up here if you want to check out the most recent gaming news or reviews or whatever it is. And until next time, guys, I'm out.